Hello, my name is Craig Savage, but you can call me Doc, and welcome back to another episode of Real World Analytics, or What Schools Don't Teach You. And if you see my frequently asked questions video, there's a number of things I want to talk about in this series, but today I want to talk about processes. And by processes, more specifically, I mean business processes. And there's a certain matter of perspective that rather than just doing things, you first think about how you will do them, or how you should do them. And when I say business processes, in your personal lives, you may have routines or habits that could be processes, but they're probably not that formal. So some of them are documented. Process mature organizations will have documented processes with process maps, instructions, tools, etc. And other times they're implied, so there's just the way we do things, as they say. And while it may not be written down, it could still be very strong. Most processes are generic, they're not unique, and they have different views or priorities. So I'm going to show you a process map, as it's called, so a quick documentation of a process that I've used in a previous presentation. And I'll talk about how that could be extended, how it could be different, etc. And one of the big questions about processes is this kind of to be or not to be, that some organizations choose to not have very strong processes. They tend to trust their people. There are pros and cons associated with that, and others have very strict processes where there's not much flexibility, that everything is diagrammed and documented about exactly how things should be done. Of course, those are two extremes, and as frequently is the case when you have two extremes that don't sound particularly attractive, the best point is somewhere in between, but it's a spectrum. Do you have nothing really written down and people just go about their business however they want, or do you have something that's very prescriptive and very rigid? But there's a difference between not having processes written down because you make the conscious decision that you're willing to take the trade-offs, that you understand why you don't have documented processes versus just not thinking about it. So why do you have processes? Why would you go about writing all this stuff down? So the first thing is just reproduction, that if I gave the same problem to different analysts within my organization, would I be getting the same results? Yes or no? If my process says I'm going to have certain artifacts, so certain code, certain documents, certain governance documents that someone accepts the results, are you going to be creating the same ones? And so if you get audited, if someone comes back, if there's a problem with something that's been written, and they ask for the official sign-off, they ask for test results, if you don't have processes, again, they need not be written down, but if you don't have these milestones in solving business problems, then if you revisit them, either by choice or by necessity, then you may have some problems. And then there's also this idea of, will the soft criteria be the same? So I'm always up in the corner here when I give these presentations. They all follow the same structure. They all have the same colors. I try to keep my slides very short. So all of that's the same and is part of my process for building this channel. There's also the idea that you're going to have process improvement. So as I go through this process of building slides, recording videos, editing them all, I've been tracking what I've been doing so that I can find out what's taking me longer than I think it should and try to improve the process. And also you can identify problems before they happen. So when I was first building this series, I would stop and ask myself, well, why am I having this series? What do I want to cover? What are some good things and bad things I've seen in other professional development series, and how do I avoid them? And so a lot of the problems that I haven't had are because I spent the time first, rather than just starting to build my slides, but to think about how do I want this series to go, to have the frequently asked questions and then cover them all individually, or all those different points individually, before I start writing code and doing other things. In a business context, of course, you could be audited, either internal or external, and for cover. In the event something goes wrong, if you can demonstrate that you followed the process, then that gives you a certain amount of protection, both from legal ramifications and just guilt. So now I want to talk about how do you build these processes, or how do organizations build them as part of their institutional learning. So the first thing you can do is just think about things. Given that you have this problem, how will you solve it, rather than just going through and charging down the road. You can also do thought experiments about how you could go wrong and try to make it so that you don't. So for example, if I look at my morning process or routine, if I want to go for a run in the morning, I can first get all of my running gear together and have it set in a central place, because I know that if I get up and I spend too long trying to find my shoes, then I'm not going to go out for that run. That's a failure of the process. So when you're thinking about how you will do things, you can also think about what might go wrong and how you're going to stop them. Even just the way I've structured these slides in terms of why, how, what. That's a process by which I build the slides. Why do I want to talk about this? How do I think you could solve these types of problems or think about these things? And then finally, what are you going to do about it? And I do this across all my presentations, so I sort of have this process of introduce the topic, say why it's important, say how we're going to solve it, and then finally, what's going to be done to solve it. So this is an example process. This is from my Breaking the Bottleneck talk, which you can find on my channel, and it has the nice pattern that everything here begins with the letter D, and if you finally get to the end, then you're done, and that's where I want to be. I want to see my work finish. I want to get some tangible result for my effort. And I could change this process. I could put something before defined there. I could have a determine that says, right, rather than starting with the problem, I could have some collection of problems, and I want to prioritize them. I want to decide which problem to solve before I get into this. Well, what's the problem statement? And at the end, I really shouldn't say done, but rather I should say diagnose, to say, okay, given that this was my process, how did it go? And in my Breaking the Bottleneck talk, I talk about a case where you go through all these things and you get to the decide and you can't confirm the solution. And so that's the bottleneck. So now I want to look at this process and say, okay, if I'm running into problems confirming the solution, is there anything I can do differently? And in fact, it's possible to rearrange the process so that you document things before you confirm the solution, so that now I'm further down the chain and I'm closer to finishing and getting closer to that done, which is where I want to be. And this is from my, my modeling with impact, that I have a process that's a little different. And what I want to stress about this process is it's end-to-end, and I've got everything kind of stepped out in terms of data, which is kind of in orange, calculated steps, which are in blue, and then I run into this economic forecast where I need user feedback. So I don't just need to do the mathematics, but I need to consider whether or not I'm going to be able to get user feedback and whether or not I have the mathematical tools to finish everything from end to end, in this case to calculate lifetime losses. So what can you do in order to learn more about business processes? So if you're a student, the earliest business process that I can think of is the syllabus. Now, going over the syllabus isn't just a wasted first day, but actually this is a really good process document. As a teacher, it says how am I going to calculate grades, how I'm going to handle attendance if you're sick and you need to miss class or a test. What are the various problems that can happen to my students, and how will they be solved or handled? But I really don't think there's an analog for students. And so if you're a student, my advice is for you to make one. So not just, okay, you're going to do your homework and you're going to prepare for tests and take tests and hopefully get a good grade, but think about, well, how are you going to do your homework? What can go wrong as you're doing the homework? What can go wrong as you're preparing for tests? And try to mitigate that by having a plan. Or you can do something very generic, such as how do you get ready to go for a run in the morning? How do you get ready to start your day in general? And so you can get things like coffee makers that will automatically turn on and grind the beans and everything else so that you don't have to do it. I consider it one of the great ironies of the world that I have to make my coffee before I've had my coffee. Frequently doesn't go well. If you're a writer, an outline is basically a process where you're going to think about what you're going to write about before you just start writing. And finally, there's the idea of having PowerPoint highlights so that when I'm making these videos, the process and what I want to cover has been outlined for me because I thought about it beforehand. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time at Real World Analytics, or What Schools Don't Teach You.